everyone. Justina Schlund. I'm the Director of Field Learning for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL.
Good morning. My name is Monica Goldson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Prince George's County Public Schools, the same as the Superintendent. Prince George's County, Maryland is right outside of Washington, D.C. and Virginia. I have 206 schools, 136,000 students, and 22,000 employees.
Good morning. I'm Jeanne McCarty, and I'm the CEO of an education nonprofit called Outteach, and we partner with school districts to improve science learning, specifically for elementary students.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. And I'm Hank Harris. My background is as a teacher principal and HR director, primarily in the Pacific Northwest. And for the last 8-9 years, I've been focusing on supporting school districts with HR strategic consulting and also executive search, finding great leaders for great school districts. But my connection to this work is a proud member of the board of directors for 3 years for Outteach. So I wear a couple different hats. From the HR hat, I'm also connected to this work because there is actually a pretty direct connection between SEL, social emotional learning, and STEM and HR. If we go to that next slide. So in the HR world, you probably are all familiar with SHRM, Society for Human Resources Management. And as an HR guy, I try to keep on top of trends in the HR world, and SHRM, as we call it, is kind of the governing entity, if you're not familiar with them, that kind of oversees how workplaces are evolving and developing. And they put out a report annually. It's called the State of the Workplace. And this is some data from the 2019 State of the Workplace. They're asking employers, they get tens of thousands of responses. A couple pieces of data that I think we're looking at are right up there in terms of the top 3 missing soft skills that employers report, and the top 3 missing technical skills that employers report. And it might not surprise you that the top 3 missing soft skills right now are, number 1, this is combined, problem solving, critical thinking, innovation, and creativity as a single miss. The second one is adaptability, flexibility, ability to change gears and handle the risk. It's also paraphrased as the ability to deal with complexity and ambiguity, so that's a second soft skill that's missing. I'm not at all surprised to see the third one, which is communication, as we bring in a new generation of folks who are far more in tune to text message each other than use their mouth to communicate. That is a missing skill as well. Employers report that the top 3 missing technical skills are trade skills, such as carpentry and plumbing, data analysis, and science, engineering, and medical. And you'll see in the next slide that also, I don't think these are terribly surprising. The same report reported that 13 of the 20 fastest growing industries in the country are STEM related. I actually thought it might even be higher, but 13 of the top 20 fastest growing industries are STEM related. And that next orange block indicates that employers report that social and emotional skills are both the most important to yield success in the workplace and are also the hardest to find. And we as educators are probably not terribly surprised with some of these findings. As we think about how we invest our school dollars into whether we think about social emotional learning or whether we think about technical, and we often think about those as 2 completely separate notions. In other words, if we invest heavily in STEM, we are going to afford our young people the opportunity to find those jobs in STEM. We know that they're out there waiting for kids, and we want to make sure that they have that technical skill. And then another part of the organization might be charged with thinking about if we just make sure our kids have a really rich SEL and 21st century skill development, they're going to go out there and have those soft skills to also be successful. But the work that our panelists have really come to understand and are going to talk to us about today is that thinking of those in silos there is a little bit of myopia in thinking about those soft skills and those technical skills as separate. And actually that these skills can be intricately connected in learning, not only in terms of efficiency, but just in terms of the richness of what that develops in terms of kids' ability to grow and learn across these. As the work of CASEL, and we're going to learn that, let's go back just one slide if you can, Jeanne. as the work of CASEL sort of indicates that there's an interplay between the social emotional, I'm sorry, I keep tripping on that word, the social emotional and the STEM, and that they build upon each other towards greater levels of evolution and sophistication for our young people as they develop these skills. So before I talk any more about kind of the HR world, really we're here to learn about education, and so I would like to ask our first question to our panelist from let me start with a big picture question. So Justina, you've been in this field for 25 years. I've been talking to a lot of district leaders, and they are wondering about SEL. I mean, there's a lot of talk and discussion about SEL. Can you give us a big picture overview of social emotional learning and why it should be important to districts and what's happening nationally, and where are you seeing successes and where are you seeing gaps?
Sure. Great, thank you so much, Hank. Hi everyone. Again, Justina Schlund, I'm the Director of Field Learning for CASEL. CASEL, if you're not familiar, is a field building organization. We're the folks who defined SEL 25 years ago. Are folks familiar? Can you raise your hand if you've seen this graphic on the screen? Great, so about half of us. So most people, when they think about SEL, if they've been exposed to it at all, have seen kind of the most inner circle of this graphic, which is the 5 core competencies that CASEL has defined as being instrumental to students' lifelong success and helping them to meaningfully contribute to their families, their workplaces, schools, etc. These 5 core competencies involve my understanding of myself. So who am I? What are my emotions? What is my cultural, social identity? All of that comes into play, as well as how do I manage my behaviors and express my agency and my voice, which is self-management, as well as how do I relate to others. So do I understand kind of the diverse cultures and backgrounds and experiences of other folks and perspectives of other people, and am I able to build relationships across differences, resolve conflicts, etc. And then am I able to make responsible decisions, such as setting goals for myself and pushing myself past struggles to achieve those goals. Now, the way that CASEL defines social emotional learning, though, is not whether I possess or do not possess these 5 core competencies, but rather a lifelong process of learning that starts from infancy and goes all the way through adulthood. So we really think of SEL as something that occurs through every interaction that you're having with people as you move through every context, whether you're a child or an adult. The rings outside of this, outside the 5 core competencies, kind of demonstrate the ecosystem for children, which is as I move through my classrooms, how do I develop these competencies through my relationships or how I'm being instructed. Same thing as I move throughout every part of the school building, as well as through my homes. And the other thing I think is important when we talk about the definition of SEL, I think you used the term, Hank, soft skills, and there are some folks, I think, who think of SEL as sort of the nice, soft, wishy-washy part of education. And the work that we've really done is to show that there is a strong and rigorous research base for social emotional learning spanning 25 years. It's research that has been done with randomized controlled trials and has been replicated over and over and over. In kind of the 2011 landmark study on SEL that looked across 213 different studies that involved 270,000 students across the nation from pre-K through 12th grade. We found that social emotional learning, high quality evidence-based SEL programs not only led to what you might expect, increased social emotional competence, decreased behavior problems, better behaviors overall, but it translated into an 11 percentage point gain in academic achievement, so on math and reading test scores. So there's a direct connection to academics. Years later, we did a follow-up study to that 2011 study that found that these gains not only occurred the year of the program and the year after, but they were long-lasting. And they translated into long-term outcomes like high school graduation, like employment rate, decreased criminal activity, etc. And so it's no surprise then that follow-up research to that found that there is a strong return on investment for SEL programs, that for every dollar you spend on SEL, as a society, we get $11 return on investment. So I think, many of you may be familiar with some of this research and some of the talk about SEL, because I think one of your questions about the national trend, right, is that we have seen overwhelmingly in the last few years, there's been kind of a nationwide SEL movement where nearly every school and nearly every district in the country at least know or have heard or have some awareness of what SEL is. I think your question around what are the gaps and challenges right now, I think although we know what it is, what we're hearing over and over is people are still kind of grasping at, how does this relate to trauma? How does this relate to restorative practices? How does this relate to my school? And what do I actually do to implement SEL? So a couple pieces that I know we'll talk about today that I think are really critical for us to focus on is one, how does SEL integrate into everything else that we're doing as educators systemically, so within the school, during out-of-school time, in outdoor spaces, etc. As well as how are we developing the robust professional learning and continuous support for our educators to be able to implement SEL well.
What brought you here to the panel today, and why are you making STEM and SEL and 21st century skills a priority in your district?
Thank you. Good morning. So for me, I'm in a district that is predominantly African American students, 90% children of color are the students that I serve. But believe it or not, 82,000 students are on free and reduced meals in my district, even though we are considered to be one of the most affluent African American communities in the country. And so for me in Prince George's County, there is a true disparity on what we offer our students, and to begin to tackle that equity question has allowed me to really look at what we have to do in our school district to make sure we begin to level that playing field. We are guilty of being one of those districts that try to look at SEL separately from curriculum. I will admit that. We figured, okay, let's, we've done curriculum, we think we do that well. SEL is here now, let's figure out what we have to do, and do we have time in the schedule to offer those skills? And we really, honest and truly, had to have a conversation with our educators, professional development team, to talk about how we can begin to integrate those experiences. And one of those ways to do that was through STEM, because it is an area where we did not have a large number of females that we were providing exposure to, as well as many of our African American students, even though we are a school district that represents 90% children of color. Honestly, when we began to disaggregate our data, we were only really filtering in certain types of students into that program. And so we had to have a very hard look at where we were. And to begin to level that playing field, we realized that we had to create educational experiences at an early age in order to make sure that our students were exposed to experiences around STEM and in project-based learning that allowed them to be leaders, to trust in their decision-making, and to be able to present that information in a way that they could convince their peers and their teachers that they actually understood the content and knew what it was that they really truly believed in. And when you go back and you look at the soft skills that Hank showed earlier on the slide, when you begin to tackle that in your classroom experiences, you too are addressing some of those skills that many of our business partners told us our kids were lacking. So we were preparing them in many of our science and technology programs, but we had not met their need in terms of providing those SEL competencies that we thought we were doing. And so we had a hard look at ourselves about what we could do to provide those experiences. And then we had some very true conversations about pockets of students within parts of our district. Their parents had the financial capacity to provide them experiences during the summer that could meet their STEM SEL needs. But once again, as I said, I have 82,000 students whose parents could not afford those summer experiences. And so for me to begin to level that, I had to offer it during the school day. Because many times in our communities, they were staying home during the summer and not going to those experiences. And so we had to have some true conversations about how we could begin to put that as part of our everyday experiences for students.
So, Jeanne, we've heard some of the research base from Castle, and we've heard a district perspective from Prince George County. So, Outteach brings an on-the-ground perspective through its partnership with school districts and its close work with teachers across the country. And Outteach, your organization, coaches teachers with hands-on science instruction. So how did you begin integrating SEL and 21st century skills into the STEM work?
So thanks for asking, because our journey has been quite different. We are focused on improving teacher practice, and we partner with school districts to do it. We're a very proud partner of Prince George's County Schools. But the two biggest in-school factors for student success are teacher effectiveness and student engagement. So when we designed and built Outteach, we built it to support both of those through experiential learning, because experiential learning is proven to accelerate learning for all students of all backgrounds and learning styles, and it also engages students deeply in learning. So that is the pedagogy that we were using. We also focused on outdoor settings because that's where students are really engaged. They're engaged when things are real world, not just hands-on, but when you immerse them in an environment that's real, their engagement goes up. So Outteach coaches teachers on very specific targeted teacher practices, and we bring together experiential learning and other frameworks like Danielson's and 3D learning. So what we zoomed in on was what we thought was good teaching, and so we even joked around as our staff, like, this is just good teaching, so let's put the practices together, and then let's also give teachers a new tool, which is simply the outdoors. And so what does good teaching look like in our outdoor partner schools? And so this is how we have designed our program. But in Outteach partner schools, teachers are facilitators and students direct their learning more. There's more autonomy. Instruction is anchored in the real world outdoor phenomena that's happening every day. Anytime you walk outside, these experiences are really easy to find. And students grab onto the relevance of why they're learning. Instruction becomes more cross-curricular, so while we focus on science, we also do really work hard to coach teachers to integrate math and language arts into that. And then students are often working collaboratively, and they're building positive relationships with each other while they're engaging in the real world learning and the problem solving. So in building our coaching program, we were aware that we were supporting more than just academic learning, but we didn't put a name on it. And at that time, I think we were talking about pro-social skills. And so we didn't set out to integrate SEL. And it happened as a result of just focusing on good, strong teacher practices, and then also moving the classroom from that traditional classroom setting where students are seated and working at desks or tables to an outdoor setting where they're more freely moving around. We also were measuring our impact on teacher practice, but we weren't measuring SEL outcomes when we initially started. But in the open-ended comments that teachers were leaving, over and over and over again, they would talk about what was SEL outcomes. So teachers would say, my students are collaborating like I've never seen before. They're offering really creative and exciting solutions to problems. I've never seen them as thoughtful and considerate of each other. And then what we saw just across every state that we were working in is that those students that teachers would say that students that indoors were more isolated, when you moved them outdoors, they were often actually leading. They weren't just working with their peers, but they were leading. So once all of this happened, we decided to get much more intentional about what we were doing. And at that point, we looked at different frameworks. We brought in Castle into our teacher practice rubric. We brought in very specific 21st century skills into the rubric. And all of you have that. We've handed it out to look at the teacher practices that we are that we're targeting. Another really interesting thing that has come up now, when we put together cohorts of teachers that launch our coaching program, we asked them, what are the practices out of numbers that we name, which ones do you want to work on specifically? And from that, we are seeing more and more that teachers are asking for support in SEL and 21st century learning in addition to science. So it's naturally becoming much more integrated. So that's why we're here today, Hank. I mean, we came at this in a different direction, but integrating SEL, 21st century learning in science and putting it into a new setting and context is good teaching, and we are excited to be here.
Your organization, CASEL, was one of the driving forces on the National Commission on Societal, Emotional, and Academic Development. You helped publish A Nation at Hope, which provided really compelling evidence that an environment that supports SEL is causal to academic learning, which explains why some of the districts I know are looking to launch SEL programs. But many of them seem to be layering a somewhat slow program onto their school organization. So to get the academic benefits highlighted by this commission, districts have got to go beyond adding a layer of SEL and truly integrating SEL into their academics. Why integrate so-called soft skills? And that might not be the best word, but why integrate them into academic instruction? And how do you make this systematic? And what are the big implementation gaps that you see?
Sure, that's a big question. So the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development kind of brought together educators, scientists, policymakers across the country, really to align on what has the research told us, not just from the SEL field, but from brain science, psychology, and all these related fields, right? And what we found, or what we kind of came to consensus on that we know to be true, is very simply that no deep learning can occur unless a teacher is paying attention to the environment and to the way that students are engaging socially and emotionally, right? And what that means simply is that deep learning is not occurring if you have students sitting at desks individually being lectured to by a teacher. And we all probably know this as educators to be true. I think if you were in Linda Darling-Hammond's keynote this morning, she referenced a lot of her work on the National Commission, and she talked about some of the research about how students have trouble learning just from videos, right? They need a human interaction, right? And I think especially when we're talking about the STEM fields, where we're talking about things that are inquiry-based and requires kind of pushing through struggles and challenges, we know this to be true, is that, number one, students need a relationship to be there in order for them to be able to push through those challenges, to be able to ask the deep questions, to be able to receive feedback as they're going through that process. And number two, that students have a deeply emotional connection to their content. And when they don't, and when that's not paid attention to, right, they are tuning you out, they are zoning out, they're not learning. And so what does all this mean for teachers, and how do we actually implement this in the classroom? I think there's a couple different ways to conceptualize the academic and SEL integration. At CASEL, we've tried to kind of simplify it into three interrelated buckets. One is, what do students believe about themselves to be true? So academic mindsets related to, do I belong to this school or classroom community? Do I believe that with effort I can grow and succeed? And does this work have meaning to me, right? And I think when we think about STEM fields, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, right, and I sat in a calculus class and I was taught different formulas and ways to approach those problems, it didn't relate to my lived experience. I didn't see the relevance to my daily life and what I would do in the future. And I think you all know that to be true as well for students. If they can't see that connection, or if they believe that they've been sent messages based on their gender or their race or other factors that they are not a math person or they're not a science person, that automatically, right, is going to limit the amount of learning that they can do in a classroom. We also think about what students learn, so the actual content that they're engaging in, or the objectives. And I think the way you can see this, right, is if you think about a science or a math objective, you can think about all the different types of skills that students might need to engage in. That is not just, do I know the formula, or do I know kind of the periodic table, right? But am I able to collaborate with a peer and work on a problem together? Am I able to present that idea in front of a classroom? So all those soft skills are part of that objective. And then thirdly, perhaps most importantly, social emotional learning also involves not just what we teach, right, but how we teach it. So again, this notion that students aren't learning deeply when they're sitting at a table in rows without interacting with others. We know that deep learning occurs when they have opportunities to interact with other peers, to explore their ideas, to lead the discussions, to reflect and spend time on their own, thinking about how this connects to their experiences, their community, etc. And so all of this is part of kind of what we see as a high quality SEL learning experience for students. So along with the integration of SEL in academic instruction, we think about how the environment is shaped to support that student, as well as how are they explicitly having opportunities to practice and develop their social emotional competencies using a program or a curriculum or practices that are evidence-based. So I think in terms of kind of the challenges that we see, again, you know, I think like we frequently hear top challenges as time, funding, those kind of general things. But really, over and over, what it really comes down to is having a way for educators to really be able to start this in the classroom. I think when educators see a clear path to how you do this work and how you are able to teach it on a daily basis, that's when the time becomes apparent, right? That's when the resources become apparent to help support that as well.
Thank you. And what are you seeing other districts use, and how does outdoor experiential learning compare? And finally, what are some gaps and hurdles you're facing when it comes to implementation?
Sure, so let me start with where we are in terms of outdoor experiential learning. We have an outdoor educational center that solely focuses on science. And we provide that experience for all of our first graders who we host a day trip there at our educational center. And then all of our fifth graders have an overnight experience. We call it Camp Schmidt. Students by far love it. But at the same time, notice I said first and fifth. So that means that there's a big gap that exists in between that, and we acknowledge that, which is why the out-teach component piece was so important to us, because it is school-based. And anytime you're going through issues financially in a district, the very first thing folks begin to look at is, okay, we'll limit your experiences because we have to transport students across the district to Camp Schmidt, and so very quickly that is the one area. And so as we started to begin to look at how we could begin to close that gap, we knew that really to make a difference, it had to be at each school, at our elementary schools, and that's how we started the conversation with OutTeach. I have 120 elementary schools, and we don't have it at every elementary. So as we're working to do that, we knew that this was one of the ways we could do that. I think we're exceptionally successful when it comes to high school level. So I say we have an elementary program and then we skip all the way to high school. And so we offer at the high school level a program called Pathways to Technology, and we're an acronym-driven county, so PTAC. And students focus on two areas: health and technology and hospitality and management. And they're working as high school students towards getting their associate's degree, both at the same time. And we have several programs like that, extremely popular. The professors actually come to the schools to work with them in those areas. By their junior year, they are transported to the community college for those experiences along with other community college students. They have mentors from the world of work in the technology industry. Those mentors are committed to doing internships with those students in the summer. Very popular program and are extremely committed to, once they have earned their associate's degree, to bringing them on to their work experience. And so that's one program that has really helped to propel us at the high school level. And then we are, this fall of 2020, launching a three-dimensional education experience with junior achievement, which will be in one of our low achieving high schools, where what we're calling is a wall-to-wall academy, starting at grade 9. And students will have experiential units, 6 of them throughout the year, that are driven by a business organization. And for us, we are strategically targeting organizations in the area of science, technology, and mathematics, so that we can expose, for us children of color, to real world problem-based issues that company has. Students have to do a presentation to solve that problem. They get rated by their peers. The top 6 presentations then go to the business organization and present their solution to the problem in front of their executive panel. And then that one team that wins actually is up to us to begin to provide them with an incentive for a prize, etc. And more importantly, bragging rights, because that's free. And so we're beginning to have those programs that help to foster leadership skills and for our students to be able to see themselves in roles that they had never been in before. So most recently, I had a conversation with a group of students, and as we were talking about exposure to careers, it struck me that one young lady said, "I can't be what I can't see." And as I left, it was the one thing that resonated for me. And so when I took it back to my team, we had some very candid conversations about places where we don't see African American females, because that's who said it to me, and where we had strategically blocked them out ourselves, because we had created our own barriers. And so we have begun the process of trying to tackle that. And what you see here, that previous slide was actually our teachers doing professional development, because we then had to have conversations with our own teachers, because we realized that we were creating some of those barriers. But as we began to look at what we're providing academically for our students, what we found is that the earlier that we expose them to STEM experiences, then they're more likely to go into our high school experiences. And so you'll see some data here. In 2016, we decided to eliminate one of those entrance barriers, which was an exam that we had created to block our own kids out. And once we removed that barrier, we allowed students entrance into our science and technology programs, multiple, by just using PSAT results at grade 8 and their core grades in English, Math, Science, and Social Studies. And we took the top 100 students. Whoever had the highest top 100 scores, you were invited to join any of our science and tech programs. And you can see what happened after we removed that from 17 on. The number of female students has grown versus our male students. And that's because when we talked to our students, they said, "I didn't believe I had the ability to." And so once we removed some of that, one of those barriers, they could see, oh my gosh, I actually can. We don't force you into it. You can decide whether you don't want to. But for us, what we decided to do was opt them in, and then you opt yourself out if you don't. What we had been doing was opting them out beforehand. And we had done that because what we did was offer this exam on a Saturday where parents had to bring them. So already, I've created a barrier, because I've told you can't get there. It's a Saturday, and if you don't have transportation, oh well, and if your parent knows nothing about it, you're already in the hole, and oh, if you already thought you couldn't do anything about it, so you're not great at science or math because someone told you that, then we created a problem. And so for us, this is how we began to level that equity playing field. We exposed them early at elementary level, letting them know and experience that yes, you can be a leader in science, you can do it hands-on, you get to go outside, you don't necessarily have to leave your school, we don't have to transport you in grade 1 and grade 5, which we still do, because if we took away Camp Schmidt, my whole community would have a heart attack, because this is what elementary kids live to do, is this overnight environmental experience. But honest and truly, they do still have an outdoor classroom experience at their elementary school that they own, that they cherish, and they actually come back and help when they get to middle school and come back and help elementary school students.
Let's talk about science. So Justina shared that Castle found that academic integration with SEL is a key priority in, as Monica described, in propelling us upward, or students upward. And what Outteach does is it coaches teachers in a way that integrates SEL and academics. So our panel is specifically focused on academic integration with science. Why science specifically? And then how does outdoor learning support the integration of SEL and 21st century skills into those academics?
So Justina and Monica have shared a lot of, I think why science, but what I'll focus on are a couple of things. So one is that I think science is actually the opportunity now for us to do this. Since 2013 to present, 84% of our students are in states that have study standards that are based on the National Research Council's framework for science learning. And so whether that's NGSS or three-dimensional learning standards, the standards are there. And so it is an incredible opportunity now for us to look for the points to integrate 21st century skills and SEL. But it's also a tremendous shift in the way that teachers have taught science. And so I think this shift requires a lot of attention. It's more focused on science practice and more field-based learning. So science is much more, with the implementation of 3D standards, it's much more active, it's more collaborative, it's more real world, and it's more student driven. So students aren't just learning science, they're doing science. So, that's one reason. The other thing I want to just talk about is what it looks like in a classroom, because I'm here to kind of bring that teacher perspective on the ground and bridge theory and practice. So if let me just give you an example of a weather lesson that we all know when looking at temperature. So in a traditional classroom, we have all seen this worksheet, we've probably used this worksheet, we have likely done this as a student, but in learning about temperature, there's often the thermometer on one side and people dressed in different clothing for different seasons on the other, and students are asked to draw a line and to kind of map what's what. So worksheets like this, they do not promote peer interaction. They're not engaging for students. They're just something to do. They don't facilitate any deeper learning that Justina has talked about or real engagement with the concepts. So when that standard comes to life now, when it becomes three-dimensional, and especially when it moves outdoors, and there's a lot of hands-on learning we can do indoors, but move it outdoors where weather is actually happening real time. An outdoor experiential lesson like that on temperature has, say students are working together to create a class plan for a shared vegetable garden or vegetable beds. So this gives opportunities for students now to make observations, to communicate with each other, and to debate what's going to happen. Where are they going to plant what? When are they going to plant it? All of that. They research temperature. They record temperature data at different locations for different times of the day. They can identify patterns in historical data, apply past knowledge that they've learned about cooler and warmer areas, apply math skills, generate arguments, and use evidence and data to make those arguments, and work together to make responsible decisions. And I've heard some decisions they made, teachers will share, are not good ones, but let them make decisions and then they'll learn when their plants don't grow and they don't work together. So it is a lot of opportunity to do, and then in doing, our students are developing those 21st century skills and the SEL skills. So one other point I want to make is why outdoors? So why do people rob banks? It's where the money is. Outdoors is where the science is. And you can't control it, it's happening real time. So we take students outside so they can be immersed in that setting and they can be just observing phenomena that are occurring on a regular basis. Teachers don't have to manufacture anything. They don't have to stay up all night thinking about how to put together a kit. They can take students and put them in that real world situation. It's also more flexible, just practically speaking, there's more space and kids are able to move around and to work together and they're not confined to their desk. So science teaching and learning, it actually becomes a lot easier when you move it outdoors.
So our last section is going to be about the implementation. I know that when I go to conferences and probably folks in the room, they want to walk away with some how-tos or what to use and so forth. And so let me start with Justina. So how would you recommend embedding SEL into STEM and other classes as well? What do you recommend as some initial steps?
Sure. So CASEL's been working since 2011 with a number of district partners called our Collaborating Districts Initiative, really to study how they infuse SEL systemically throughout their entire system. So this involves STEM, it also involves all content areas, as well as your central office, your your school buses, your front offices, all of that. And we've developed, based on this kind of setting these districts, a theory of action focused around 4 core focus areas. You can click through, I think the key activities next to them haven't popped up. You can click through all of them, but I'll just briefly touch on these and then tell you where you can find them all with accompanying resources. So the 4 core focus areas we've identified is number 1, that if you want to do SEL and you want to do it well, you're going to need a foundational level of support and a high quality, robust plan of implementation. So what that means is I have to prepare, right, my entire school or district community. People have to know what SEL is, they have to feel committed to it and understand where we're going with it. And I need to align my district or school organizationally and with my resources to be able to support this effort. Number 2, after I've done that, right, one of the biggest learnings we've had working with our districts is that this work, of course, is for the students and serves the students, but it's really, really difficult to do SEL well if you have not paid attention to the social emotional learning needs of the adults in your school system. So we have an entire focus area that's really dedicated to not just how do you teach adults to have the skills to implement SEL for students, but how do you guide adults to reflect on their own social, emotional, and cultural competencies? How do you create a staff and work environment where adults themselves feel supported and empowered in order to support the students? And then focus area 3 is really about how do you actually do this work for students, right? How are we integrating this systemically with academics? So thinking about our academic standards or frameworks. How are we developing the partnerships with families and community organizations to really be able to do this well across different contexts? And what type of programs and lessons are we pulling in? And then lastly, that this entire process is driven by continuous improvement. So am I collecting the types of data that let me know that we're on the right track and leading towards the student outcomes that we're driving towards? So where do you find all this and the resources to support it? We have released kind of a number of free resources at CASEL. One is the District Resource Center, and I'm sorry the link's not on there, but it's drc.casel.org. And it's a set of resources that we've collected across lots of different districts across the country aligned to the focus areas and the key activities and really support you in implementing and doing this work. We've also been collaborating with AASA to release a district-wide SEL Essentials Toolkit for Superintendents that's newly released at this conference. You'll find them in sessions related to SEL, including this afternoon a session in room 1B at 3:45 if you want to learn all about this toolkit, hosted by my friend Rob, who's sitting in the audience over there. As well as we also have a CASEL guide to school-wide SEL and a program guide that helps you in selecting SEL programming. So all of that's on our website, casel.org.
Great, thank you so much. Monica, similar question. What have been your biggest takeaways from your efforts to integrate these skill development programs, especially outdoors, and what worked best, and what were you most impressed by?
Our biggest takeaway was that you've got to make an investment in your teaching force. That's where the core of your work is. And for my school district, we had 5 superintendents in 10 years. And so turnover was big. And so for us to honest and truly talk about an initiative in our teachers' minds meant, okay, this too shall pass. So when we make an investment where the core of our work truly is, and that's in our teachers, and supporting them in next generation science standards, and being able to take lessons that they can utilize that still meet those Common Core standards, have their students experience experiential learning, as well as beginning to tackle the competencies for social emotional learning, we're able to get the most bang out of our buck. And so I would say to you, as you begin to identify dollars to make that investment in your professional development teaching force. The other thing I will say is we got the biggest bang for our buck is to honest and truly lock ourselves in a room and have an honest conversation with each other about where we were. We pulled out every piece of data we could find as it related to science, mathematics, and exposure to engineering programs for our students, what they look like, who they were, at what age, and we began to just have true, honest conversations about where the gaps existed. And for us, that helped us to lay out a map of what we need to do. Are we there yet? We're nowhere close. We still, as I said, I have 206 schools. And so in an amazing vision of what I foresee every school, students would have those kinds of experiences and exposures to STEM that we talked about, and having the ability to execute real problem solving, leadership skills, justifying their reasoning and rationales for making a decision in their everyday learning experience, not only in science and mathematics, but in every course they experience, so it becomes part of who they are every day. And then the competencies for the social emotional learning is what our kids experience. And so create that game plan of what that looks like, and then put a time frame on it. We have it on chart paper. It's in our executive leadership team room. It's intentional that it's posted there. We strike through what we're able to accomplish. In my leadership team meetings that I have every Tuesday, every 3 weeks we circle back to where are we on executing that plan. Because in a district our large, we can get caught up on so many other things that we lose sight of one of the many things that we're trying to accomplish.
And Jeanne, what do school leaders need to invest in order to make these shifts? And if they had to prioritize one thing, what should be that priority?
So if I'm short, I'm going to share 3. Okay, so one, just to piggyback on Monica, it is professional learning for teachers. They are your multiplier. If you invest in the right kind of professional learning for them, you will also reduce that teacher turnover. You'll increase their job satisfaction. But when you look at professional learning, make sure that it's high quality, and it also has 3 components that we think are important. So one, that it's ongoing and job embedded. We all know that no profession can grow in its workforce with one and done sessions. So on-embedded, job embedded is really critical for success. And this is a big shift teachers have to make. I mean, this going from teaching knowledge to also science practice is big, and so they need support to do it. Relevant, make sure it's relevant to their day-to-day, not just kind of the bigger picture that we're aiming for, but it's relevant to their day-to-day frameworks that they're teaching and what they're held accountable for. And I also think, we talked about adult learning and how important it is for teachers to grow their own social, emotional learning skills. I also think it's important for teachers to be in professional learning programs that honor best practices. So we're sitting here talking about experiential learning for kids. Let's make sure our teachers also get that, and that they also are learning in an environment that's supportive. So coaches provide feedback, but the feedback is for growth, and it's not anything it's not punitive for them. And then the other Other thing I want to recommend, and all of the professional learning, I think about how you use your title fund. So this is doable, and you have funding for it. The other is that just as you would invest in any other instructional materials or tools, invest in outdoor learning tools. So just some very simple things could be simple weather stations. I don't think these need to be fancy. I think the simpler the better, actually. Erosion tables, vegetable beds, water features, simple outdoor seating and whiteboards, but things that will draw your teachers outdoors and help them feel comfortable. And then the third thing that I just want to add is that we also have to give teachers the permission to teach science. So our research tells us that on average across the United States, elementary students are getting 18 minutes of science a day. Because we're focused on math and ELA, which is great, but let's also broaden what we're asking our teachers to do and build it into kind of whatever their performance standards are, because science is where we can do all of this. Science is what Hank also talked about our business community is looking for. So somehow our schools, we've got to bridge that gap. So invest in science and we can make it all kind of come together.